if I can be canceled by the left, literally anyone can be canceled by the left.
You cannot advance without parroting every woke bullshit message that has come along over the years.
Their biases really had them believing that the Republican Party and anyone around Trump is a white Christian nationalist.
You get a tax deduction for corrupting an election by using a nonprofit organization,
which is a clear abuse.
We had the government telling all the social media companies what Americans could see. That affected the outcome of elections, many elections, not just the 2020 election.
There's a machine to take out your opponent, a machine built on unconstitutional tactic.
This isn't, do I like Trump or not? This is, do I like America or not?
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Harmeet, thank you so much for joining me here today in Woodside. And I have been following your work, but I also just wanted to comment on how beautiful and strong you look standing on stage at the RNC, giving a prayer from your heritage and sharing that with this community. And it was so, like, everyone felt it. You could feel it through the screen. You radiated this grace, this connection to God, this desire for coming together for greater purpose.
Well, thank you. That is very important to me. And my heritage is really, and my faith is very much the basis of all of the legal work that I've done to advance liberty. And so, I'm pretty open about it. And I'm honored that President Trump allowed me to share that important moment with the whole country.
Tell us more about it, because I don't know many. I think people were both just in awe that the RNC has cast such a wide tent for multiple faiths, multiple races, multiple, women. There's incredible amount of female representation right now in the Republican Party, and strong women.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're both from liberal Silicon Valley. We've both spent a lot of time here, worked here. And you're still a Californian. And liberals don't know what to make of it, because their biases have really had them believing that the Republican Party and anyone around Trump is a white Christian nationalist. That is not what that's not who the RNC is.
Right, absolutely. So, it's never been my experience, but it's actually been the liberal stereotype going back decades. When I went to Dartmouth, I was a 16-year-old from rural North Carolina, from a conservative family. I went to Dartmouth College. Frankly, I picked the college that was as far away from rural North Carolina as possible that I got into. And I was immediately kind of culture shocked by, both the intolerance of my sort of upper class, elite, limousine liberal classmates from New York. And I started getting involved in this conservative newspaper called the Dartmouth Review. And eventually we got into a lot of college controversies. I sued my university. I was an editor-in-chief. I was on 60 Minutes and featured in the New York Times. And, I remember Morley Safer asking me a kind of very similar question. He's like, well, how can you, how can, you be part of this sort of, right-wing white male organization? I'm like, I'm the third female editor, and I'm not the first person who's, different than the mainstream here. And, he's like, but you speak English so well. You can't be considered an immigrant. I'm like, well, that's your false assumption. There are so many false assumptions on the left that they have to put people into boxes. And on the conservative side, like starting with that merit-based effort, there was no consideration of my race or my gender. The consideration of the board was, how well does she write, and can she articulate views well and advance our agenda? That was it. It was merit-based. And so that's really been my experience throughout my life in the conservative movement. And you're a lawyer like me.
Yeah.
Much less so in law firms, by the way. Today's American law firm might style itself as woke, and people have purple hair and they sit on the diversity committee. But actually, it's still a sort of more male and white-dominated field than, for example, my own law firm that I started. And so there's just so many false assumptions on the left. And this desire to pigeonhole people in boxes is really very limiting and unnecessary and frankly un-American.
It is un-American, and it actually creates race division in odd ways that I think are really unhealthy, because it enforces stereotypes as a paradigm for org structure.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Oakland, and very diverse place, left when I was 17, saw places that were not as diverse, much more affluent. But, everything seemed a lot more, people seemed much more comfortable in their own skin. Mm-hmm. And so you go to places like Tennessee, or you go to these, historically red states. And I just get the sense that there is greater comfort and ownership of who you are, because there's a flexibility to be an individual before you are a race or before you are an identity, like a prescripted
I agree.
identity.
I agree. And so many times in California, people try to shame me by saying, as a woman of color or as an immigrant, how can you fill in the blank? And you really don't get that outside these far left coastal liberal enclaves. And, I grew up in rural North Carolina. My dad wears a turban. My brother wears a turban. He was the only orthopedic surgeon in the whole county, and people had to accept different people there. And they just did. It was part of the culture and the lifestyle. I felt very comfortable being who I was. My family felt very comfortable worshiping in our faith. And so that's America. And by the way, for people who take that for granted, I've traveled all over the world. I've lived in other places, and this is by far the most free country in the world, but we're losing that in some way. We have a sharp contrast here in this presidential race over that balkanization and division of spoils approach to governing versus be who you are and be the best that you can be America approach.
Yeah, which is how I viewed myself. I always viewed myself as somebody who, if I worked hard, got the good grades, got out there, polished myself in ways that made me a productive member of society. It didn't matter if I was a woman or a person from a broken home, right? Or a person who grew up on, government assistance at some point, or, somebody who was mixed and ambiguous. Like, I was always asked, what are you?
Mm-hmm.
What
Right.
are you?
Yeah, where are you from?
Yeah.
And I would always like to mess with people and say, I'm from North Carolina. Yeah. No, where are you really from? No, I'm from Smithfield, North Carolina.
There
That's
you
where I'm
go.
from. And so this desire to check a box and put you in a place is really un-American, I think.
I think so too. I think there's a difference between being curious and being respectful and being like, wow, that's beautiful. I'd love to learn from your culture. And then, there's that, which is, I think, a person-to-person connection. Mm-hmm. And then there's this other thing, which is a bucket class system.
Right, exactly. So there's a difference between tell me about yourself and then you talk about what is important to you. And that may come out, it probably would, versus where can I put you in how do I deal with you?
Or how do I need to treat you?
How do I need to treat you?
How should I be treating you?
In California, we have, under the increasingly turgid employment laws, every partner at my law firm, every lawyer at my law firm has to go through this DEI training, this diverse sensitivity training. Every couple of years we have to do that. And some of this stuff is just so ridiculous. And, having to worry about some of the things that are really, I think, artificial social constructs as opposed to natural, how do you treat people decently? It's just very, very limiting and artificial.
Yeah. And so I've been really shocked about the intolerance of the people I've known for well over a decade, in some cases, sometimes 2 decades. Just over the last few months, and it's been a gradient of, when I first left the Democratic Party, there was a set of people who kind of went underground in their association with me. They said, can you take me off your website? Because I have a board for my foundation. And they're like, my LPs are calling me. They run hedge funds, or in some cases there's hedge funds, and then some of them run venture funds. And they got calls from some of their other investors who are large Democratic Party donors, and they're like, how can you be associated with her? And these are the same people who I think quite respected and admired me a few months before.
Yeah.
And so no, just this, and this is before I even spoke. I don't, or went on any right-wing media. None of it. This was literally just
a
the
change
act
in position
of moving from the Democratic Party, going independent, because these were issues that the Democratic Party no longer cared about. And those issues were childhood health, vaccine safety, and environmental health.
Right.
And so these calls that I would get, like, I'm sorry, like, I can't talk to you anymore. If you need me, you can call me, but it has to be very quiet.
On the down low.
And can you please take me off your website? And I was like, this is really weird. This feels very uncomfortable and very un-American.
Welcome to my world, Nicole. I could have told you that would happen.
Wow.
I've been living that for all the years I've lived in California. I came to California during the dot-com boom in 2000. I worked for 3 years at Page Mill Road, and worked in a big law firm there. And I immediately felt it. It was one kind of public interest or pro bono work was welcome, and anything about religious liberty or, on the edges was not welcome. It wasn't part of the orthodoxy. And so I was constantly having to step back and be told, if you really want to advance in this place, you're going to need to, put that part of you on the shelf. And I just wasn't willing to do it. And so it really created a glass ceiling for me in big law in California. And so I eventually started my own practice, and that was a life-changing experience, because as the boss, I suddenly had the ability to do exactly what I wanted, take the cases I wanted.
Yeah.
And, you have to immediately build a thick skin. I didn't have a lot of liberal friends. Whatever I've had, people have distanced themselves over the years, particularly when Trump came onto the scene in 2016. And there is just a complete lack of tolerance in California. And it is tolerated, it is expected to be intolerant. And it's signaling. And so some of your friends probably felt bad internally about doing that if they were genuine people, but for their own economic security and signaling,
really
they had
economics.
to do that. It was survival for them. And they would have lost business, they would have lost position, they would have lost money had they continued their association with you. And that's not the America that I remember growing up at all.
Yeah, and then there's also this nitpicking of the individual, trying to find anything that signals. It's kind of this Darvo technique, the reversal of the victim card technique, and they've gotten really good at this to the extent that it is a culture. It's a massive, pervasive culture and a way of conduct and a way of silencing anyone. And it's like, it's tearing apart families. We were talking about that. It's tearing apart lifelong friendships. It's tearing apart businesses. It's tearing apart foundations. I now actually have lost all of my board members and advisors.
Oh, no.
From my foundation.
Sounds like you need better ones and new ones.
In California, it's hard to find people with that wherewithal, the economic and the personal and social wherewithal to go, to say, I still agree with Nicole because the quality of her work.
Right.
And what's really interesting is this reverse denouncing of past work. Everyone was like celebrating the work I was doing. And it was indisputable. I mean, it was addressing climate change through regenerative agriculture, because you can really do a lot with managing, especially like local climate temperatures, by good land management practices. something in California that you would think would be obvious because we have so much land here, but unfortunately, the current powers that be find these industrial systems to be their solution to climate change. But I still fit within the umbrella. She was like, well, she's not a climate denier. And actually the science, she's bringing the science. So this is good. So we like this. But the minute I've left,
Yeah.
it's like all of my past efforts are now being questioned. And I think this is really dangerous because now we're losing all of these qualified, thoughtful people
Right.
in subjects that really are important.
Yeah, no, there's no room for growth through conversation and, exchange of views. It's very dogmatic. And we've seen this before in history, of course, right? This is echoes of a cultural revolution where the educated and the elite, in a way, the people who were once respected, the next day they're forced to come before a tribunal and denounce themselves and account for their crimes. And you see this so many times. I'm a knitter. I knit this sweater. You even see it in the knitting world. Well, thank you. You see it in the knitting world.
Goodness.
Someone, there was a prominent knitting blogger who questioned why Michelle Obama was put on the front page of the cover of a knitting magazine when she didn't knit the sweater that she was wearing. Okay, so. And does she even knit? And this person was like immediately canceled, denounced, disinvited from yarn shows, had to like make her account private. And then all the people who'd been friends with her had to that post on Instagram and TikTok or whatever, apologies that, please accept my apology for, I've now been educated about and I've humbled myself. I need to learn. I need to do the work. These words you have to say, these formulaic words you have to say to atone for your sin of being a friend with a forbidden person is permeated every level of our society.
Oh my
It
God,
is
the
insane.
knitting world's been
The knitting world has been taken down.
Oh no.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's so much to talk about here because this is not a way we can evolve as a nation. And I'm seeing things for the first time. I mean, if I can be canceled by the left, literally anyone can be canceled by the left because I was like the darling. The poster child.
Yeah.
My portfolio was like criminal justice reform. And then I saw what happened to it. It was like I came in and I said, let's create a more fair, transparent system. We'll work with DAs. I have this great AI company I've been funding called Recidiviz. And Recidiviz helps process all of this caseload because it's the infrastructure of the system that's broken.
Sure.
The infrastructure is why we have injustice because it's a decrepit, lacking competency and expediency. And so you lose so many of the foundations of the criminal justice system to the inefficiencies of it.
Yeah.
So I was like, let's fix that. And then, you have all these like well-intentioned progressives. And I see them, they're all over. And I think they're watching what's happening to me. And they're like, am I brave enough to speak up? Like, if I make it through this somehow, it's like, if we make it through this somehow and give birth to this like more tolerant era, we're going to be able to bring all of these great progressives with us too. But right now they're scared because they're watching our
vilification. Absolutely. I mean, look at the cognitive dissonance on the left on this issue of criminal justice. Which president of the United States has actually in recent years pardoned people for drug offenses, pardoned people who are over incarcerated, made overtures towards criminal justice reform, particularly towards minorities who have suffered from the, frankly, Clinton era, over-criminalization of possession offenses.
Yeah.
It's President Donald J. Trump. That's the only
and he
one.
did very publicly and efficiently and proudly.
Yep, absolutely.
Pardon powers are some of the most efficient powers of the executive branch.
Yeah, absolutely. And so does he get any credit for that? No. Kamala Harris, who has put more people in jail for minor offenses to pad her record for her own purposes with no compunction of the families destroyed by that. she's the darling of the left. And again, the cognitive dissonance between the actions and the image they portray is shocking. And, we'll get into election-related issues, but the rhetoric is one thing and the reality is another.
Yeah. No, the cognitive dissonance, the people on the left feel it and they're feeling very uncomfortable. And so my goal, Harmeet, has been, how do we create a place, a home for these people who are very much aware of the cognitive dissonance?
Are they?
Well, they feel it. I think they feel it before they're intellectually aware of it.
Okay.
But the feeling is there, the feeling of like, well, what am I actually doing? And then if you make these suggestions, like I was making a suggestion to this woman I've worked with for years on criminal justice reform, I said, I know we've been working together since 2014, but I'd highly recommend you actually go out on the streets and see it with your own eyes and not just sit in your office and read the reports of the NGOs that you've poured tens of millions of dollars into.
Right.
Like actually, the landscape is fundamentally different today than it was in 2014 because there's this other energy at play right now that is taking things like immigration reform, criminal justice reform, racial tolerance, and religious tolerance. And there's this other force that's coming into these categories that are progressive categories, and they're just taking all order and dumping it into chaos.
Yes. Yes.
And so all of these progressives who are like, but I was doing it the right way, are now watching just chaos sweep through their fields, and they're trying to defend the work they've done. Their good work. Some of it has been good work. But they're driven to more thoughtless defense of what's going on around them.
Yeah.
And so my hope, Harmeet, and I don't know if it's even possible, is that I can help wake up some of these people to understand that these forces that are coming in and bringing chaos to these areas that really do need careful, steady hands, thoughtfulness, measured competency.
Right. Incremental change that, is based on partnership and cooperation, which is all the things progressives believe in. And empiricism. Yeah.
And empiricism, measurable data collection, that they can begin to see that what has happened to these fields that they've dedicated their lives to, and this is where people have to get over their ego a little bit, but where they've dedicated their lives to, that they have been co-opted by something that is very dark, very old, has been around for a very long time, has impacted your family, my family, is the reason why we're in the United States. I was talking to an Iranian woman who escaped Iran. She's an engineer. She lives here. She knows.
Yeah.
We all know. We know what's going on. We have it in our blood.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we don't take it for granted, the promise of America. And what America is becoming is very scary because these evil forces, these nihilistic forces that have overtaken many parts of the world are at our doorstep right now. And they have Western credentialed faces, but they represent this evil. And that's really how I feel when I think, can I do one more hour of work today? Can I do one more podcast? Can I do one more media appearance? Well, I have to, because the way of life that my parents brought me to America for is at stake right now. And it's a one-way ratchet, what we've seen in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
It doesn't come back.
No, I just got chills because I feel that too. And I know you just went through something in your personal life that is so hard. You lost your husband, and here you are, you're out here fighting this fight and taking so much like criticism from the outside world. And, when you first came in here, you said you grow a thick skin.
Yeah, you really have to. And if you want to do this work, you have to. So first of all, it's one of the beautiful lessons my husband taught me was, don't read the comments.
Yeah.
Don't engage. And on the listserv of your HOA, where people are attacking you for no reason other than your views that are outside whether we should, use natural sheep to, retard the, fire load on the ground, don't respond. you have to pick your battles, and getting down into the dirt with those people is not productive. It makes them feel better. So I have maintained that discipline. It's hard sometimes, and sometimes the critics are within your own party. And you've experienced the left attacking you, and I've had that myself and on my side as well. So, you just have to keep your eyes on the prize. What are the goals, and not get bogged down in the petty stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson. The path forward. So Trump's numbers are doing exceptionally well, and we can talk a little bit about the election. It's I believe less than 2 months away now.
Yep, we're within the 60 days, and I agree with that assessment as of today. And it is chaotic. You have the whole mainstream media out there aligned with the other side. So you have to read all of these things through a filter. And how do you account for the lawfare aspect of it and the distortion of our election system and accurately predict? That's the challenge as well.
And you've been following you're massive contributor on the legal front, election integrity with ballots. I read Lara Logan's recent investigative report on the current state of the voting machines and mail-in ballots and ballot stuffing. Mm-hmm. She's predicting massive irregularities. She's already seeing it. Is this also what you're seeing as well with?
So let me break it down a little bit. This whole election, so much as we live here and we love to bash California, California is irrelevant in the national election, right? It's going to vote for the Democrat, whoever that is. Maybe one day we'll change that. That's not the case right now.
Yeah.
And even most of the states are irrelevant. They're either going to go one way or the other. And even those battleground states, you're really talking about a dozen counties or less in the United States where this election is going to be decided. And so a lot of the naysayers of the critiques of the election irregularity say, well, I haven't seen that. No one's stuffing ballots in San Francisco. Well, correct. We don't deploy vote monitors in San Francisco. I've done that one time. There's no hanky-panky going on here that doesn't need to be. There's an organic, overwhelming Democratic vote here. Mm-hmm. The hanky-panky occurs in the urban districts, the urban counties of the swing states. It occurs in Maricopa County. Mm-hmm. It occurs in, Detroit. It occurs in the Wisconsin cities. It occurs in Pennsylvania cities. That's where the distortions occur. That's where you see people in the 2020 election putting up physical barriers and not allowing statutory observation of the ballot counting.
Wow.
That's where you see promises that we're going to stop counting at 10 p.m. and then counting continues and ballots go in. Just wholesale ignoring of laws passed by legislatures. And then this is endorsed by judges who refuse to enforce the laws passed by the legislature. So a few unelected bureaucrats, or elected perhaps, change the outcome of an election in a few counties, and that changes the outcome of the national election. That's what happened in 2020. So you don't have to have massive irregularity. You have to have targeted irregularity with a massive outcome. So in Georgia did not allow ballot harvesting and mules being paid to carry ballots, but Mark Zuckerberg paid for that. And Georgia's Republican elected officials at the time hated President Trump so much, they let it go. And that's how Georgia went in the wrong direction, through just a couple of technical means. Now, we've gone to court after the fact extensively to fight these things, and I think we're in a better place in many of these states because of that. Have we eradicated all of these potential loopholes? Absolutely not. So I'm losing sleep over that, and I will tell you that the left has been funding lawfare, but it's not just the lawfare of filing lawsuits, it's who hears the lawsuits. Yep. They've been preparing the way for that for about 20 years, since the 2004 election, okay? They lost the 2004 election. I mean, Americans, of course, in a patriotic wave, supported the current administration at that time, wishy-washy as it was in many respects, in my opinion. But George Soros galvanized Democratic donors to change the way they funded elections. And they did it in a very disciplined way, and it's now their 20th year of doing it. And so Democrats have a whole alternate system. They have a bank. They have, Act Blue, which I think is probably laundering money from sources that are unaccounted. There's a lot of unexplained micro donations happening from moderate retired people that are really unexplainable. So they've been doing that in many ways, but what they've been doing through the front door, let's call it the front door, is something that Republicans haven't been doing. I have to criticize my party on this. Every successful car salesman or farmer or whatever, they decide they want to run for Congress or Senate or governor. And there's nobody paying and investing in people running for district attorney in borderline or a purple city where, that district attorney could be prosecuting people for vote fraud. A Democrat district attorney will never prosecute people for vote fraud. We have now seen in the last few weeks many stories. The Department of Justice just indicted somebody in this last week for voting in multiple jurisdictions. It happens. It happens even according to Democrat prosecutors. But they pick one or two examples and they say, we found the two people who did it. It's not happening other than the two people we prosecuted. It is happening. It is happening all over the place. Our governments, because of the way that we do elections, are sending ballots to people who aren't entitled to vote. They're registering people who aren't entitled to vote. People who are maybe ignorantly not perfectly fluent in English are checking boxes when they get their driver's licenses, and they're registering to vote. And they're in a absolutely legal regime, they would lose their ability to become citizens. That is not happening in this country. And so, anyway, I digress. The point is, Democrats have been, it costs as little as $500,000 to elect a district attorney to a city.
Yep.
That's all the investment required. It costs millions to get someone elected to Congress, but that one district attorney can change the outcome of the election in that state. That one district attorney in Philadelphia can change the outcome of the Pennsylvania election. And so if we invested in that, let's forget Republican, if we invested in some moderate person who will just call balls and strikes, that would be an advancement over the system we have for relatively little money. The Republican billionaires and millionaires and well-heeled investors need to invest in that. They need to invest in Supreme Court justice races. We had a Wisconsin Supreme Court election last year, and I remember I think run against Ronna and lost that election, and I was caught off guard on Fox News. I was asked a question about it, and she said, well, how do you think Republicans did? 1 out of 10 in harvesting the votes for that. I said 2. We lost.
Yeah.
Boy, did I get a nasty phone call after that from my party leadership. But that's the fact. The fact is, we claim that we're doing it well, but push comes to shove, we didn't turn out the vote the way the left did. And if we had won that election, we would be less nervous about Wisconsin in this election.
I will say that now, having been in the middle, because that's where Bobby and my campaign was, we were kind of squished between the big, DNC and their crazy strategic operation that really does put lawfare front and center. It's efficient for them, it's cost effective, they don't have to raise as much, and it allows for money to exchange between hands very easily, because you can pay the lawyer to do this, you can pay the DA to do, or you paid to get the DA to get in, and there, that's got to.
You can buy the judges.
You can buy the judges. So it's all very mapped. They have good data science. I've seen it. The number of organizations for which I've seen their strategic documents, it's probably like 5 dozen different organizations, and they are precise. They are targeted, and that is exactly what they do. And I've supported that. I will say it. I get a lot of criticism for the right for my past donations, but I was told that is what you do to win elections. I did not support ever any of the ballot stuffing. I wasn't aware of it, actually, because they don't sell that. They would never, donors would never fund that kind of conduct.
Well, big donors are doing it. The Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, who are now backtracking and saying, I won't be doing it this time around. He did it. He did it in a wholesale fashion. All of the Georgia ballot stuffing was funded by one man and his wife, Mark Zuckerberg and his wife. That's how they did it. Yeah, you're right. They probably couldn't get retail investors to say, let's corrupt the elections in Georgia by ignoring the law, doing it sub rosa, making sure there's no cameras when we do this illegal stuff. That's what they did, and they got away with it. And they got away with it maybe because one billionaire decided, I'm going to take that project on myself. Now, maybe he won't do it this time around, but it was pretty successful.
Yeah.
And so, it's on the left, it's calibrated to the point that the plaintiffs in many, I have about half a dozen cases going on right now where the plaintiff, they all hire Mark Elias or his, cronies, Michigan Welfare Rights Association or the NAACP, nonprofits, okay? So you even get more bang for your buck if you're able to do it that way, right? You get a tax deduction for corrupting an election by using a nonprofit organization to carry the water of saying it's racist to require voter ID.
Right. So C3s, basically. So
C3s.
A lot of C3s end up being deployed as C4 operations.
Correct. Absolutely.
Which is a clear abuse.
A clear abuse, and there's nobody to prosecute that.
Nobody's prosecuting it. Yeah. Look, these are all things that I've seen happen to my own portfolio and been like, no. And so that's why the last 5 years of my life, I was like, criminal justice reform, I think I'm just something's happened here with the trying to fix the infrastructure of the criminal justice system.
Right.
It is being co-opted to effectively progress an agenda that is political.
Oh, yeah.
And it's
Big
not
time.
helping any of these individuals who are stuck in the system. And I've been very clearly seeing that the last 5 years. So I pivoted and I said, okay, let's work on minority-owned farmland. Because if you look at the numbers, farmland across the United States, Black farmers have lost 60% of agricultural rural ownership. And that's impacting the food supply. And so when you talk about these food deserts, it's because the communities are not feeding themselves, and then you have big ag coming in and buying up all of these
Foreign
lots.
ag.
And foreign ag coming in and buying it up. And so I'm looking around in my progressive community. I'm like, who wants to work on this? This is so obvious. This is such a great way to progress equity and solve many of the social issues.
Any takers for that?
Chirp, chirp,
You know where
nobody.
the takers are? The takers are pushing Black ownership of marijuana outlets. That's where the money is in states like California.
But you can't eat marijuana.
Can't eat marijuana.
No.
You'll be eating Cheetos and Doritos when you have your marijuana.
Right.
So.
And so for me, I'm like, the calculation is so simple and beautiful and refined, and I can't find any takers on the progressive side anymore. And that's been my experience pretty much predominantly the last 5 years.
It's almost like their virtue signaling doesn't match up with, the impact of their activities.
It's blatant hypocrisy.
Yep.
It is it's hypocrisy, it's incompetence, and now I'm looking at how much money is flowing through it and who's funding those things, and it's corruption.
And who's receiving the money? What are they doing with it? I mean, you saw that.
Yeah.
It's been highlighted in the case of the notorious Black Lives Matters organization. But there are, as I pointed out, the Democrats have created this Arabella Advisors, which invests in over 200 nonprofits, the Tides Foundation on down, Ford Foundation, but there's lots of little ones you never heard of. And that's a lifestyle for activists. And it's a lifestyle for all the people who work there. And how many human beings' lives are impacted in a positive way? None, really.
Yeah, because they're told that you take it. It doesn't matter how many people you help. You can help a few people in your community, and that's enough. And if you cause enough chaos and resistance against any of the infrastructure or any of the establishment, then good job.
Yep. The disruption is the goal. That's enough.
The disruption is plenty. Someone will pick it up later.
Yeah.
And the thing is all of those someones who will pick it up, we can't do it anymore.
Well, we need to fix that. And so I think your act of being the VP candidate for a disruptive candidate was an act of bravery, and what you guys have done together to, cross the aisle is even more brave.
We wanted to win, and statistically, we could have won if it had not been for the Lawfare, because as you pointed out, the Republican Party wasn't as organized on the
right.
ground. They just weren't. And so I came in, I analyzed what was going on over there, and I said, we can beat this. And then I was looking at the left, and I was like, they're just crazy. They have no policy. People think
It's just raw power.
I mean, Joe Biden's can't make it up a flight of stairs, and it's becoming harder and harder for the media to cover for him. I did see the Kamala Harris thing coming. What I under anticipated with that was how well produced her debut was going to be, and that they had put like $200 million into buying influencers and producing her and doing her media. But I knew that was going to peak and come down, as it did. And then I saw all of America, and I was like, I love my country so much, and I love the people here. And I saw the Asian Americans speaking out against what was going on, small business owners who felt disenfranchised. I saw the Black community frustrated and seeing the inconsistencies and messaging towards delivery of real services. I saw, people across the spectrum calling for school choice for the first time.
Right.
And I was like, we're unified. We are unified. America is unified on the issues.
Yeah, there's a lane where someone like that could win. I agree.
Yeah.
But you did not, you're new to the game, so you did not realize that it's very heavily rigged on the left side, and there's a machine, and you're not part of it.
Well, there's a machine to take out your opponents.
Yeah.
And it is a machine built on unconstitutional tactics.
That's right.
Anti-American tactics, anti-justice system. I mean, it is so illegal, many of the things that they're doing. And if we had, similar lawfare on the right, which just doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist.
The right is just playing defense constantly.
If that. I mean, it was my main focus when I ran for chair of the RNC. And I'm a volunteer in politics. I don't get anything out of it. I mean, my law firm does work, including for the Trump campaign in this cycle, but we weren't doing it at that time. And I had silently lived through the third term of the prior chair and gritted my teeth. My leader of my party supported that. And so I said, okay, this third term, and then we're going to have a chance for change, because she promised that. And then the fourth term came around, and I was like, look, I do not spend my and my husband's nights and weekends volunteering for the party to just have it flushed down the drain through this sheer, inaction, corruption. There's corruption on our side, too. The political consultant class will back anything that pays them, and they will back a broken machine that will lose because they know they'll still be there to have a job afterwards.
Right.
It's as simple as that. So I took on the consultant class, not really thinking that through, and all the consultants on the right, unified against me, and we had what we had. And so we're now a year behind where we would have been. I think the campaign and the current RNC leadership is doing their best to catch up, but there is an institutional, we're a decade or more behind, 15 years, I would say, behind. We've certainly realized the importance of it, but getting donors to understand that this is a multi-year, this isn't, do I like Trump or not? This is, do I like America or not? And am I going to invest in bringing America back to a level playing field where people can evenly exchange ideas and the best person wins?
Yeah.
That is just not what we have right now. And when you have not invested in Supreme Court races and prosecutor races and district attorney races and AG races even, and laid the groundwork, when you don't have a pipeline, when you have power like we had in 2017, and you don't fix loopholes in the National Voter Registration Act, which allows people to not show ID and encourages prosecutors and AGs to look the other way and secretaries of state to have an open system, a porous system, you could have fixed that. We could have fixed Communications Decency Act Section 230 loopholes that enabled
censorship,
lying and censorship and propaganda at a massive level, both with the COVID issues, but also with election issues.
Yeah.
We could have fixed that in 2017 if our Republican Party had discipline, message discipline, and had accountability. But there's the power of incumbency. That's a systemic problem that affects both parties, has affected your side certainly as well as ours. But there's this power of incumbency.
My former side.
Your former side.
Yeah.
There's this power of incumbency that has really made DC very sclerotic. And so all those laws that if I were the queen for a day, I would fix, there's nobody who's running on the agenda of fixing that. Who's running on the agenda of fixing NVRA so that states can require proof of citizenship to register to vote? Nobody's calling for that on my side, which is supposedly our platform. So that's what makes me crazy. And people are always approaching me for money in much smaller check amounts than perhaps others. And I ask those questions, and most people are just not asking the questions even. So
I hear you. I really hear you. I hear the need right now, and this is why I'm not ready to change my. I want to be an independent for a while, because I think a lot of this is going to come from independents who might vote for a good Democrat over here and a good Republican over there, has the means to fund something that is strictly about American integrity.
Sure.
And election integrity and integrity of the DOJ. And calls out the inconsistencies, because I'm tired of seeing well-intentioned people giving their money to groups that are being then co-opted for political purposes. We are not going to solve the issues this country faces. We do have a criminal justice system issue. Our incarceration rates are through the roof. But we're not going to fix the infrastructure, which is what America needs right now. America needs investment in its infrastructure across everything, across climate-related, food supply chain issues, health care. That's a corruption issue as much as it's an infrastructure issue, but the criminal justice system as well, and social justice issues. These are infrastructure issues. Education, it's an infrastructure issue.
Yep.
And I see $10 billion in this election cycle going to fight each other.
Right.
$10 billion to fight each other. None of that's going to infrastructure improvements for election integrity.
Right. And you know what is funny is you talk about the infrastructure. I agree with you completely. And in Silicon Valley, the answer to everything is always like some technological fix, like AI. AI is not going to fix these issues. There's some fundamental bricks and mortars things that have to be fixed in all of these things.
I just want to take a step back and say it's really nice to sit here and talk to someone about issues versus parties. Because I will work with anybody to fix the issues. And that is when America is at its best. When we see a broken road and we come together and figure out how to fix it. When we see a need for a bridge and we come together and we build the bridge.
Right.
We don't argue with each other about who's going to build the bridge.
Right. And America used to be that way until fairly recently. Some younger folks may not remember the time when people would be giving speeches on the opposite sides of something in Congress, and then they would play basketball together afterwards.
Or go to each other's kids' birthdays parties.
Go to each other's kids' birthdays parties, or respect each other, or joke with each other, or have dinner with each other. That doesn't happen anymore in DC, and it doesn't happen anymore in Sacramento. I mean, Sacramento has become like the paradigm of, just sclerotic inefficiency over there. It's just a one-party state with terrible results for the consumers because of that. If we had a vibrant two-party state here, we would have some compromise and we would have some solutions. But, we are just absolutely, I think, circling the drain. I always think it's got to stop getting worse here, and it doesn't. And so it's kind of shocking because it's the most beautiful state. It's the most incredible diversity of climates and landscapes, and the Silicon Valley, where we've both chosen to make our homes for decades, is the engine of ingenuity and change, and it's become unlivable here. And for most people, I mean, if you're a millionaire and you have the ability to buy your way out of the healthcare crisis and the food crisis and all of that, you're okay. But I suffered through the American healthcare system for the last couple of years with my husband's health, and we had the resources to pay for private doctors and outside insurance, and I had the ability to basically quit my job for months and go to every medical appointment. And I have an assistant who called insurance every few minutes over every little thing. But And I kept saying to my husband, well, we thank God every night for that, but how does the rest of the world live? How do they cope with this system?
I have an autistic child, and I will tell you, it is hard even with unlimited financial resources to provide the kind of life I want to give this child, because she's severely autistic and needs someone with her 100% of the day. I don't know how one in 22 families is dealing with this right now in the state of California. And my heart breaks thinking about what is going on in this state.
It's very broken, and there's no accountability for it. There's no one talking about it in the presidential race. It is taken for granted. And that is one of many issues. The schools are broken in America. And I have been doing litigation on some of these issues over parents being excluded, parental rights. It's not a political issue people are really talking about very much, and so people are talking about 2 or 3 hot button issues, but these are the issues that that make people miserable, that change their lives, that destroy lives, and these are the issues politicians need to be talking about.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about California a little bit, because, I made the mistake of saying I would consider running for governor, and people went nuts online.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's a real desire for something different here.
Yeah.
And it's coming from the left and it's coming from the right. And maybe there is a chance that there is a independent sweep or even a Republican sweep of the state this come November. Trump is estimated right now to walk away with about 40% of the vote here in California. That's millions of people.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at a map, people don't realize it, and people are always mocking me for living where I live, and
Well, you're in the epicenter.
Yeah, I'm the epicenter, but I also have a home on the coast where I can see the whales from my house, and that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
But when you look at the map, California is a red state by geography. You know, there's a thin slice of blue on the coast where there's a population overload, but most of the state, and you just drive an hour into the interior of our state, and there's Trump signs everywhere, and there's people working with their hands, and there's people involved in their communities, and there's nature, and there's beauty, and so it is really 2 states in that sense, and it's an east-west divide of the state. But, it's sort of with self-interested, line drawing and the so-called independent commission, which isn't independent.
Yeah.
It really defines a ceiling for Republicans right now until that system changes.
It's happened in the past.
It's happened in the past. Ronald Reagan came from here, and
Right.
Pete Wilson was the governor, and we've had Republican leaders in the state when the state was great. And I don't think other states want to emulate California's infrastructure, its schools, its healthcare system. We are not a paradigm of anything positive right now, and that should change. And so maybe an independent is a way back for that. I hope you seriously consider that. But when you really drill down, I was living in San Francisco when Gavin Newsom was the mayor.
Yep.
Gavin Newsom owned businesses. Gavin Newsom was the darling of the business community of San Francisco. And he was part of the wealthy family. The Getty family supported him, and Willie Brown Machine supported him, and all of that. And to become governor in this state and in this Democratic Party today, you have to abandon all pretense of supporting businesses through the front door.
Yeah.
You have to run to the far left to be accepted by the party. And he's happily done that in his quest. I mean, it could have turned out differently. Something biologically could have happened differently. He could have been the replacement candidate for president. He wanted to be the replacement candidate for president. He's a white man. That's an institutional barrier for him. He may have peaked, because of that, and I'm not
He missed
crying
his
any
window.
tears
They didn't even have
over
him
that.
speak at the DNC.
Yeah, well, that was obviously Kamala Harris and her influence and her machine, made sure that he's permanently sidelined. But that's
Yeah.
probably okay for America because the man is hollow and has no principles.
Oh, I mean,
but
he gave up every bit of integrity,
every bit of integrity along the way.
thinking that the machine would reward him for
Yes,
it.
exactly. He sold his soul,
sold
and
his
he
soul.
did not get the payback, and he won't. I think
He
he's
won't.
peaked.
Yep.
I think he's peaked. The best thing he can hope for is, in a future Democrat administration, hopefully many years from now, ambassador or
Maybe if
something.
he transitioned to a woman,
I won't put it past him.
right? I mean, that would let him back on stage. They would let him back on stage maybe at this point. Well, because I mean, like, look, I'm joking, but there's a bit of truth to it, Like Pete Buttigieg ran on being a gay man with black children. Like it is all identity politics.
Yes, it is. It is.
And if you kind of just wiggle your way a little bit more into one of these like celebrated identities, they'll platform you.
Right.
But if you are a traditional white man living with your blonde wife and multiple children, and your postcard has a chicken on it, or your holiday card has, because I've seen one of his holiday cards where his kid's holding a chicken, you don't fit in anymore.
Sorry. Thanks for playing.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Well, that's okay actually for America in that case, but it's too bad that that's the system where all this talent is being sidelined.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Newsom is talent being sidelined, but and you feel that way too. But I also find it a bit hilarious that they cannibalize themselves.
Yeah, well, at some point, my husband used to joke with me about this. Is like, oh, you're having a rally, you need to take the Rainbow Coalition of person in a wheelchair and trans person in a wheelchair, and you need to have the whole panoply of characters in order to be able to have a successful protest, or no one's going to pay attention to you if you're simply normal people protesting about something.
Yeah.
So that identity politics and it's comical because it has to constantly reinvent itself. I mean, there was no such thing as some of the contortions we're seeing recently. There was no such thing, and now suddenly. So I don't know what the next frontier of category is going to be, but I shudder to think because it's already pretty bad.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to live a life as an individual, and it's like if people would just feel free to be themselves and not some category of person, it would be much better. But before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about media. My ex-husband co-founded Google and actually retired. And I have to say that your representation of James Damore was very interesting, because I will say that my ex-husband is probably more like James Damore than he is in terms of a representation of this kind of ultra woke culture that's now there. And I think he actually was, they needed to reset their management.
I heard that at the boardroom level that he wasn't one of the ones who was in favor of this, purge, but of the how James was treated. But ultimately he didn't win, and James for the crime of, and he's a character like so many in the Silicon Valley of 2017, intelligent man from the Midwest who came to this job, dropped out of a PhD program at Harvard to take this well-paid programmer job in his 20s, and was very bright, was upwardly mobile in the company, and to get to the next level in the company, like every company in Silicon Valley, he had to go through the diversity training. And the diversity training is a euphemism for the re-education in the checking of the boxes. And in that course of that, he, like many white males, suddenly realized he's the enemy in that calculus. He's the lowest person on the totem pole. There's no way in his lifetime he's going to be able to climb out of that hole. And so he said, well, this doesn't seem fair. Maybe we should consider, ideological diversity.
Well, I have it here. So I had actually never read Google's
his
ideological
white paper.
echo chamber.
Yeah.
I had never read it because
Yeah.
I just assumed it was full of hate.
Right,
'Cause
of
that's how
course.
the media described it.
That's how the media portrayed
The
him.
media described him as this, white supremacist who hates women and wrote a manifesto against women. And then I read it and I'm like, wait a second, this guy says some pretty interesting things. He says, neither the left or right is 100% correct, and both viewpoints are necessary for a functioning society, or in this case, a company.
Right.
And then he goes on to saying, look, I believe there should be a good number of women in tech. But what I've noticed is that if we're going to do this kind of hiring, here's a better way to do it. Like, women are fantastic at managing cooperation across teams. Women are fantastic at front-end engineering, which is why you see more front-end engineers represented by women. They're great project managers. And he's just laying it out. He's like, just think about it differently.
Yeah.
So that you don't create a psychologically adverse place for non-minorities.
Right.
And
Well, that was the wrong thing to say at Google. So,
well, hey, but I really encourage people to actually read this document.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like the perfect PC document, but it's damn close to being pretty PC.
and you have to read it in the context of what was Google at that time.
Right.
Google had, and by the way, Google has changed this from what I understand to protect against lawsuits like mine, but Google has had a number of affinity group chats, and people were encouraged to spend 10, 20% of their time in non-work related chatting with one another on furry sexuality and, transsexuality and, off-roading, whatever it is. They had affinity groups for everything, and you could engage in that, but you couldn't engage in this. This was wrong thing. You couldn't say, maybe we should reorganize the way that we think and include different viewpoints. He's not a conservative by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
You can tell
his
that.
girlfriend is a feminist data scientist
Yeah,
who
at
works
that
in tech.
time. And so,
Yeah.
but it was a conservative lawyer who stepped up for him, see, because there was no liberal lawyer in California, no labor lawyer who was willing to defend James Damore. I mean, so the call went out amongst conservative groups, this guy got fired for no good reason, can we help him? And I was literally the only plaintiff's conservative employment lawyer in the Northern California and willing to take that risk. So I did, and I'm really proud of the work that we did there because we highlighted the absurdity of, and Google is not unique. The same was happening at multiple tech companies. It's happening probably today, for all I know. I mean, tech has left California. A lot of those workers don't live here, and they don't have to put up with California's labor laws. But the groupthink, and it was incredible. So I'm really proud of that work that we did, and
Well
we've
done.
helped some other people like that. And so, but I couldn't have done that at a big law firm.
Yeah.
It had to be a boutique to be able to do that, where I was able to take the risk. And over the years, every time I take a controversial client on, someone will call me and say, I can't. Give me back my retainer. That's okay,
What did you learn about Google through this case? Who's actually running Google these days? Because the founders, I'll tell you, they're off enjoying life.
Yeah, absolutely. They moved on to other endeavors.
Yeah.
They're dabbling with new endeavors. And so this is 2017, that case. And what I learned is that this is kind of a truism across technologies, but the HR people have disproportionate power. And they're like the jailer. There's a personality type who goes into being a prison warden. Okay, I've represented people in that world as well. It's not a personality type I like to socialize with. And HR people are kind of like that too. They're the gatekeepers, the wardens, the discipline, the people who hand out the hall passes, and the people who make and break people's careers. They wield disproportionate power compared to their actual contribution to the company's well-being. There's certainly the shareholders' well-being. So there's a lot of that. But I remember going to a college reunion, a law school reunion, and there was an in-house counsel who was one of my classmates. She works at one of the big tech companies.
Yeah.
And I am by far the most famous member of my class at that reunion in terms of PR. But this person wouldn't make eye contact with me. I always walked up to her. I say, hey, I'm Harmeet. Remember me? She's like, oh, yeah, I know who you are. And turned her back on me. And, the fact is that people like me make people challenge people like her, And so it's that high school level of are you in the club or are you not in the club? So
Yeah.
all these lawyers, all these executives, they've had to toe the same political lines that you and I were talking about at the beginning of this podcast. You cannot advance in that culture. You cannot make managing director. You cannot make senior vice president. You cannot advance without parroting every woke bullshit message that has come along over the years. And so that is the groupthink. And how does that benefit shareholders? Does that benefit shareholders? I'm telling you, it doesn't benefit shareholders. Now, these companies are artificially propped up by these woke left-wing consortiums that control investor dollars and
advertising dollars.
Advertising dollars. So I don't know if you know this, but we've taken that on at my law firm.
I didn't know that.
We represent a big social media company that has taken that on.
Oh, I have a feeling I know which one.
and so
Yeah.
you know, this is necessary. So we're using antitrust law at my firm now to take on the woke monopolists of ideas that are driving corporate dollars, that are driving pension fund investments. And we need to break up that monopoly because it's not good for shareholders. It's not delivering value to shareholders. I would argue that woke investing is not delivering value to shareholders.
Censorship is really hurting shareholders too.
Censorship is hurting shareholders. Censorship, people don't understand.
And propaganda.
People don't understand the extent to which America has a state media narrative. We have a Pravda. We had the government telling all the social media companies what Americans could see. That affected the outcome of elections, many elections, not just the 2020 election. It affects today. I mean, I say we used to have the military-industrial complex when I was growing up. That was the most powerful big bad bear out there. Today, it's Big Pharma. Big Pharma is absolutely controlling media, controlling corporations, controlling what you see on every television network. And people don't understand how that's affecting their lives. Why is every doctor prescribing statins to everybody above a certain age? Maybe we should ask questions about that, you know, and there are very few doctors who are willing to stand up and challenge that because they lose their jobs. They get deplatformed.
I've been looking at different shareholder routes as well because shareholder lawsuits are incredibly powerful. There was one almost 10 years ago with Google, which changed their entire kind of Me Too environment. They had to rewrite all of their employment and arbitration agreements. So these shareholder lawsuits go a really long way. Is anyone bringing like a censorship shareholder suit right now that you've seen?
Someone has to fund these things, you know? I mean...
I would.
Okay, we should talk about that.
I would.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially if you have
there's
the
lawyers ready to do
plaintiffs.
it, and so you have you just have to marry the plaintiffs who are willing to stand up and take the hits, and the character assassination, investors to support it, and targets who can change through that process. And so it's I've done a lot of what we call impact litigation through my whole career, and you have to put those elements together with a good lawyer and a good forum, and the possibilities are limitless.
Are there any forums left in California?
I don't want to give away the secret sauce, but
Okay.
yeah, there are places I would
Yeah.
sue over other places. I would not sue in Silicon Valley probably,
Right,
but
yeah.
you know, there are even some lawsuits that can't be had in the Ninth Circuit, but there are other places where, you know, first of all, a lot of our California corporations have left California.
That's true.
They've taken their culture and their executives to Texas or, you know, Florida or Tennessee or whatever, but guess what? The courts are different in those places, and they're susceptible to pressure and change there where they aren't in California. And so that actually opens up a lot of opportunities for us.
I'm optimistic. Meeting you is so inspiring on so many levels, spiritually, intellectually, a sense of, you know, I have that thing too of like, this is wrong, we need to do right. And if, you know, you look around and you can't find anyone to do the right thing, you got to just do it yourself.
Absolutely.
And I really admire that about you.
Well, thank you. And I am inspired by your guys' campaign and your incredible bravery in crossing party lines to do what's right for America. That is inspiring to me.
We have to learn how to just be competent and Americans that believe in who we are, right? Who believe that as an individual, you get to be whoever
That's
you
right.
want to be.
That's
and
right.
that we can have reasonable conversations with each other.
And disagreements.
And disagreements.
Break bread at the end of the day.
Amen to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.